Joining me today, my name's Robert Reinhardt. Today I'll be talking about real-world options for live streaming playback. And this is, I'm going to be honest, it's a tricky subject. I mean, this is the session to put the time into evaluating where we are in the industry. And it's hard because, for me as a consultant, the type of work that I do for most of my clients, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm all across the spectrum, but I have clients that are, I'll call them ragtag teams of live streamers, and they make money at it, right? Like one of my, he's actually a business partner of mine now because, and I'll talk about this sort of aspect of, I think, the financial commitment that people are willing to make to live streaming, right? It's just, I can't tell you how old the thinking is, and I don't want to make it sound like that's a bad thing, but streaming media as a conference has grown up on enterprise, right? And a lot of the conversation here is enterprise. And I would say, I certainly help enterprise clients. I mean, I've worked with clients like Intuit, a lot of corporate in-house streaming. They're not going out to the world with it, but they, insurance companies, people that do a lot of internal streaming, and we have to worry about their VPNs and international clients connecting to their networks, or international employees coming into, data center connections that they have in the States. But most of, I think my fun work is with those ragtag teams, right? The people who really are startup budgets. They want to build something on their own, or at least feel like they're owning a lot of their solution. They don't want to invest in a full turnkey solution where they're just slapping a logo on it and away they go. And that's, and so I don't want to say I'm going to be all over the map with this presentation. It's not the most exciting visual presentation because I'm just going to tell you it's mainly text and just me talking about experiences with my clients, which hopefully is still useful for most of you. If not all of you. So what does real world mean? It's like that term's used a lot. And, for me, it has to be available to talking about something, and I'll just be honest, like H.265 or HEVC. There's things that can happen today with that tech, but it's not going to appeal to a wide audience, right? That's still a large vendor discussion right now. Even some of the people in the magazine were like telling me, "Come on, Rob, you got to make people use H.265 more." I'm like, I can't do a whole lot about making people use H.265. We need to get that codec in places that maybe I'll have some influence drinking a beer with someone who works at a chip manufacturer, or someone who's making decisions about what codecs go into their devices. But real world, again, is just something that has to work today, and it has to be cost effective. I actually used the word sustainable in one draft of this deck, and I didn't want to make it sound like I was an environmentalist, even though I am, but I wanted it to make it viable. Like I said, a lot of my clients, and I'll talk about this in another slide, are still using technology that's been around for a long time. It's just becoming more difficult to trust that technology is going to work in everyone's hands. An interesting article that I found while researching was actually on live stream. Carolyn Gollum had a 62 must-know live video streaming statistics blog post. A lot of useful information in there. It's about a year old now. I think it was released last year around this time. But I thought it had some interesting information in there, and just how, of course, some of this is obvious that 81% of internet and mobile audiences watched more live video in 2016 than 2015. But what I liked was this second statistic. It doesn't, again, not a big surprise that breaking news makes up 56% of most watched live content. But this second half is really where a lot of my work is involved. And obviously we're streaming some of these sessions. This one I think is just being recorded. And not streaming live. Are we streaming live? I don't even know if no, we're not. This one's just being archived. But that's another really important aspect, I think, of live, is VOD archives of live are, I believe, just as important as live these days because, let's face it, how many people, especially I'm from the West Coast, I can't get a lot of my friends to watch a live stream of, even if it's me at 6 a.m. their time, right? They're not going to wake up for it. Maybe my kid would, but she would just be bored pretty quickly. But that 43%, that's an interesting number for me, because again, that's where there's a lot of interest in live streaming. And of course, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, all of that is playing into it. 78% of online audiences already watching video on Facebook Live. And that as an adjunct to anything else that's happening. I think this year already, I do work for government, mainly in my home province of British Columbia. I am a Yankee that went off to Canada. I married a Canadian. But it's interesting because, you know, we just had the BC Tech Summit, which is a pretty big tech gathering in Vancouver, really big show, and the government puts a lot of money into it, along with Microsoft was a big sponsor. And they were Facebook live streaming the premier talking at that event, and I was responsible for getting that stream from the vendor that was on site doing all the hardcore video production out to a Wowza box that the government was running for internal use, and we were pushing from Wowza to Facebook Live, and it was very successful. I was really happy with and you know, to see that the kind of interaction and just how many people. I mean, we probably had 3 times as many people watching on Facebook Live as we did over the government server that where I set up the player. And so that it really does show the reach that, you know, especially if it's a free event, you know, something that like a BC Tech Summit. It was interesting to see how that that ARM really reached a lot more people, and I was surprised they didn't do more Facebook live streaming at that event. I think, and again, it's just new, right? People are still experimenting with it. Organizations are trying to see where that's going to go. I am going to get more technical. I made a joke here that the source is me on this, because these are my statistics. 100% of my clients, it's still an RTMP HLS world when it comes to live streaming. That's with whether it's government or you know, like I said, the ragtag streamers, and they're still making money doing it that way. They have more of their customers complaining that Chrome's making it awfully difficult to enable Flash to do a live stream on desktop, and that's true. There's no, you know, there's nothing that any of us can do to. I guess we could all try and complain, sign petitions or something like, don't make it so difficult to enable any plugin. But you know, it's even, you know, anything that's plugin based just has a bad rap these days, and it's a disconnect between where we are with the technology and what the options are, right? And so, and that second statement there, you know, 100% of my clients aren't a fan of Flash, or they know that it's not the best, you know, doesn't have the best adoption in terms. I shouldn't even say it doesn't have the best adoption. Flash is still around and it's still on the you know, installed. It's just it's becoming more and more difficult to use that plugin, and that's nothing new to you as an audience, right? And now I'm just going to go into sort of a breakdown of where we are with these protocols. I mean, you know, HTTP streaming, it's really where everything is right now, right? HLS and Dash. I mean, we just came out of a Hulu keynote, and those are their 2 primary formats, and they're doing one-to-many broadcasts, right? They don't have to worry about real-time interaction. They're not probably as concerned about high latency times, although I know one of the vendors here at the exhibit hall talked to me last night, and I mentioned them in a slide later, was just talking about, I guess there's this gripe that now that Twitter's out there, you know, when you're talking about sports, Twitter fans are ruining it for internet watchers because of the lag time, that this 30-second, maybe up to a minute delay is causing, you know, some ruffles in the sports world, and I don't doubt that. I mean, I'm not a sports guy. I mean, I do like to watch some sports, but you know, I'm not avidly watching my Twitter feed as I'm watching a game. But that's where we are with you know, most, and that's what most. Yeah, I would say a good 50% of my work for existing clients, ongoing clients that continue to come back for me for help with their tech stack. What I'm doing for them now is making Flash a true fallback. For many of them, Flash was always the first option. They would put RTMP first and fall back to HLS if Flash wasn't enabled. A lot of my clients are using JW Player, and thankfully with 7, you don't need Flash for the HLS parsing anymore. They're taking advantage of the same things that a lot of players are using in terms of media source extensions, and so you can just do that kind of stuff in JavaScript now. You obviously need a player that does reassemble HLS on a on a browser where it's not natively supported. And I would say it doesn't, whether it's Theo Player, JW Player, BitMoving, all those players are moving in the right direction. And I'm not going to pick favorites here. Usually my clients come to me with existing platforms. It's rare that I have to migrate them from one player to another, unless they're not happy with it. And then in that case, I'm just going to do an analysis for their business needs and pick the player that's going to fit that situation the best. But so again, just going back to what I'm doing with those clients now, we're just making RTMP more the fallback. And again, like one of my clients, they preferred RTMP as a primary because of the low latency, right? Especially I have one of my clients in British Columbia does, I'll call it minor league hockey, but he's done a really great job at getting low tech hardware in place to stream hockey games in a ton of arenas around British Columbia, even in places where there's not a lot of bandwidth. And RTMP, of course, is, and I talk about this on the next slide, or let me just jump to RTMP. RTMP is what we see still as the primary push out, right? All the hardware encoders out there, they're all using RTMP. That's not really client-facing, though, right? Obviously, we can do whatever we want in our own little pipeline to get a live feed out to whatever we're using for ingest, whether it's an Akamai POP or a Wowza Origin. Those are the two primary situations I'm working with. But RTMP is going to be the best fit there, and it still is. I mean, I haven't seen any new hardware come out, like Teradek's new cubes. They're still good. No one's removing RTMP support from their software or hardware encoders. It's still the go-to option. You might use RTSP, and I talk about that on this earlier slide here. RTSP, I'm working with, I have done work, and I'm actually in the middle of a project where home security systems are involved, and that's all RTSP out of these devices into a server that's going to push it out probably in a different flavor. But again, like you talk about any kind of IP-based camera, and I do a lot of, with that same hockey client, he's gotten involved with city and municipal government work, and whether it's just traffic cam or they're showing the playground at a park or some gym or rec center in that community. Those are all those typically are like Axis IP cameras that are then feeding into some kind of Wowza network that they have, and it might push. I mean, most of the, and I guess where I want to go with that conversation again, and the kind of work that I'm doing, and why I highlighted that statistic from live stream. 43% of live streams aren't these massive live streaming events. You don't have, I do think right now we have that as sort of our I don't want to say it's as simple as that. I don't like to make simple dichotomies like that, but that, I find the conversation here at Stream Media, East or West, is that, you've got the big players and then you have everyone else. You have people who are trying to, push Hulu to Hulu-sized audiences, and then you have other people that are trying to really fill a niche market, and those, they're looking for different things, and I'm impressed when I see technology that appeals to both of those camps, right? And they don't have, not all tech has to appeal to both camps. Obviously, they have very specific business use cases. I skipped over WebRTC, and I'm going to sort of make that's the last protocol I wanted to talk about. And it's got a lot of promise, and I talked about another vendor that I'm going to mention again in a slide that's got a booth here, but in relation to WebRTC. But as you can see on my slide, it's, I called it, I was making fun of the browsers, calling them Flash-disabled browsers, right? Because you might even have Flash on it. They're just making it harder to run Flash, right? So I find it curious that Chrome and Firefox are the two companies most behind WebRTC. I'm not saying there aren't other people behind it. And those are the browsers that are really pushing this. And kudos to them. At least they have a suitable replacement that they're trying to push for real-time communication. And again, WebRTC, I think most people think of video chat when they're thinking of WebRTC. They're thinking of two-way video. It's not one-to-many. So you're not worried about scales so much. I mean, obviously, if you're going to build a brand new teleconferencing or video conference, teleconferencing solution, you've got to worry about scale. And all of us want to believe that oh, there could be a huge audience. I mean, I don't. Most of my work is about safety nets and over provisioning for live streaming, right? I mean, I can. With good cloud devs, I can make scaling architectures with Wowza on AWS so that, if peak demand at a live stream is going to be more than we expect. But I rarely have to do that, right? Usually it's way more cost effective to hire one resource like myself, spin up a couple instances. I do an internal broadcast for a global car company manufacturer, and they do these dealership broadcasts for the United States, maybe Canada too. And we do an East Coast broadcast and a West Coast broadcast. I spin up 2 instances of Wowza in California. I spin up 2 in Virginia. We probably get 1,500 eyeballs for each broadcast, roughly, and that does it. We don't have to go to Akamai. We don't, it serves that purpose really well. And again, for that situation, it's just become more HLS and RTMP as a fallback if HLS isn't available with the player that they're using. But it's a go-to that hasn't had to change a lot. I've been doing that broadcast for the production company that's hired me to do that for almost 4 years now. They generally, I'll say they do 1.5 a year because they sort of spans over the end of the calendar year. But it's just that's where we are with that kind of tech. And again, WebRTC for that client or any of my clients, it's something that they're looking to me. They're like, "Hey, Rob, is it ready yet?" I'm just like, "Well, how much money do you want to spend on exploring this as an augment to what you're already doing?" Because that's where I see. I mean, it's just like so much of what we've heard over the last few years. What are you willing to spend to create hybrid solutions as we move forward in this flashless world? And it's not a flashless world yet, right? I mean, obviously it's still there. And like I said, like most of my clients are still making money. I'm doing one of my latest projects is for. There's a few of them out there. I can't disclose which one it is, but these cattle auctions, right? There's like a few companies that have a lot of. Americans eat a lot of beef. Canadians do too. So these beef are bought in a certain capacity, and more of it's online, right? You got these cattle auctions. A friend of mine built one of the first ones. It was all flash. That most of them have been all flash, like they were like Flex apps or spun up apps from that they grew over the years. And it's only today or this year that this one guy's decided that he's going to try and convert his whole system away from Flash. And Flash is still going to be part of it, but it's just not going to be the whole thing, right? So there's still this conversion of Flash apps to Flash as a widget that hopefully will be replaced one day. So we're minimizing how much Flash plays into that, but it's an auction. You need it to be real time. It can't. If it's anything more than a second latency, then you're causing an issue with the main driver of why people are at that event. Are we going to use WebRTC for something like that? We could for the people that are using browsers that want it. Is he going to build a native app? Again, that's where I think it's an interesting conversation. To most people, I would say to the enterprise people here, you mentioned native app. That's not a big deal. I would say to over half my clients, that's a big deal. They're not going to just drop. I mean, I would say you're looking easily, at the kind of work that I do for my clients and the teams that I see typically assembled. You're not building an iOS app for less than 30 grand. You're not building an Android app for less than 30 grand. And that's small potatoes to enterprise, right? But to a guy who's doing cattle auctions, he's got to really, be invested to spend that much money or more. I mean, I would say that's minimum potentially, especially if they don't want to work with overseas teams. And a lot of my clients are in that position. They'd rather hire experts to do it and know that it's going to be done right. And I'm not saying that you can't do it right with other teams. I've worked with all sorts of teams, international or otherwise. But that's, again, just where the state is. And when it's something like WebRTC, where it's still in a draft spec, that's going to even make it even less of an appeal, right? Like, well, I don't want to be the bleeding edge person who's proving this technology out, right? And so I think it'll be interesting as the client, the client software gets easier. When I say client, the players that can utilize WebRTC, the publishers that can use it, or whatever that variant is going to be. I mean, right now I think it's equivalent to. You remember when they had that 802.11 pre-N spec for wireless. It was pre-N, and Belkin was selling pre-N. I mean, it's just like there was this mad rush at that time. I don't know if a pre-protocol would do so well these days. After that happened, I don't think anything seriously happened from pre-N, but maybe there were some chips manufactured that were worthless once they finally ratified the spec. But my point is just with WebRTC is I personally don't have clients that are coming to me saying, "Hey, Rob, let's build a WebRTC solution," because they want to make sure that it's baked and that it's done, and that more importantly, you've got the browser adoption. Everyone obviously got used to Flash being this glue. And I honestly am just going to say, I mean, I've been saying it for a while now, even with something like H.265 or any future codec. If you don't have agreement with standards and the people who are pushing standards, then it's not a standard and it's not going to go anywhere fast. I mean, Macromedia and Adobe did a great service that they just got more slack for doing it than not by having a free plugin that made H.264 available everywhere. I mean, YouTube wouldn't have been successful had it not been Flash, and I think most of us know that, right? But let me make sure I didn't skip another slide. And I'm going to focus now on two-way AV, and I would say historically, even as a Flash app dev, when I wore that hat years ago, I had very specific clients that were trying to do two-way AV. And I worked for a lot of startups that didn't fail. I did a lot of work for a speed dating website that I don't think ever saw the light of day. Worked on that thing for probably half a year and it never launched. And I don't know, I think it was more a business development case than, we had all the tech ready. And this was way before we had cloud options to do things. But where we are today with two-way audio video, the biggest problem I see is that codec thing. I mean, if you look at any of the WebRTC examples for two-way live, you're just running into this compatibility issue. And Wowza's got some interesting draft preview stuff working with WebRTC where they're transcoding on the fly because that's part of what that offering can do. But that doesn't scale very well, right? If you're transcoding real-time chats, it doesn't scale to something that's going to support lots of users that you like on a Periscope level or whatever. That's just a lot of work when you don't have a unified codec. It'll be interesting to see what happens with AV1. I know Jan's been talking about AV1 in some of his sessions and writing for Stream Media, but where this future takes us, I'm not saying we've left H.265 behind or anything like that. I don't want to be quoted for saying anything too silly, but this code, the adoption of codecs. I mean, I'm actually leaning more towards VP codecs for something in terms of just where the future might hold. I mean, if we see, there's been plenty of ROI studies published by Google or people who have looked at Google and the amount of traffic they're sending out of YouTube. If you've got a lot of traffic, then the extra transcodes to VP 8 or 9, or 9 in this case at this point, is most likely going to be worth it for your delivery. But I'm not, again, for most of my clients, it's going to be an H.264 world and still will be for the foreseeable future. And I want to talk about some, joke there, just meet the replacements. We've got some companies that have been around for a while now, TalkBox and OpenTalk, Twilio, Peer5, and the one I was just mentioning before, I talked to them last night a bit at the reception, Phoenix P2P. They just secured a hefty round of financing, and I called it proprietary real-time. I think their director of biz dev is here on the show floor, and he was just saying like, wow, we got fed up with the fact that WebRTC wasn't this unified spec yet, so we just built our own, and that's a full platform as a service. I tried to classify some of these as software as a service versus platform as a service, but even these companies don't really just come out and say what they are, or you might see contradictions of whether they're software as a service or a platform as a service. The difference being, of course, that software as a service, you can sort of feed into your own, solution. You can sort of mix and match vendors. Where I see as platform as a service, you're sort of married to them, and that becomes your, a core part of your offering that you are saving yourself, the build versus buy. Where, OpenTalk, Twilio, Peer5, they have SDKs, APIs that you can plug in to your own system. You're not necessarily, and I'm not saying that that Phoenix doesn't have that, but that's, primary differentiator, I think, between services. I used to do an OVP session here where I evaluated OVPs, and it's a similar scenario now. I mean, what do you want to do with your live stream playback? And again, most of these are all focused in this P2P, not necessarily one-to-many scenario. And I don't know if it has any validity, but when I did a search on Google for, I can't remember what my keyword terms were, but it was something like live streaming P2P. Maybe I even put in the word Octoshape, because if you remember, Adobe added Octoshape to their grid delivery enhancement plugin, and CNN was one of the first to really push it out with a speech from President Obama. And I was surprised. Like, one of the first links that came back when I searched for that was criticism of P2B being invasive. That how dare CNN try to share my bandwidth with other people? And that's an interesting thing that I haven't really seen or heard about until I read that post, that people being upset about their bandwidth being shared. I mean, on the illegal front, I don't hear any of my friends complaining when they're downloading that, hey, well, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. You're going to give me that file, I'll give you that file. But when it comes to another organization basically using your network bandwidth to deliver something that they're making money off of, then and it doesn't surprise me that there could be some unforeseen consequences. The good news is that most people don't know what the heck's going on their computers. So even if you are sharing data or sharing bandwidth, most people may not know about it, and they're not going to raise a complaint. But it is interesting, this focus, this shift to peer-to-peer networking. It's been talked about a lot, and I'm not saying the business case can't be fulfilled eventually, but I just had to say that as an aside. And of course, you build or buy, right? And so you can build your own. Like, there's plenty when it comes to real time. We've got WebRTC libraries out there. I mean, Google's largely responsible for WebRTC.org. Ericsson did a heck of a lot of work with WebRTC. It's funny, you go to some sites that I was doing the research for this session, and their sites look current, but Ericsson's site hasn't had a blog post since 2015. So that's that's a while ago now. I mean, in internet years, and I think Google and WebRTC.org. I think it's OpenWebRTC.org, or it was open. Open was in the domain, but I originally had it listed, but I'm like, this site isn't even being maintained. The last blog post is 2 years old, and this is from a big company like Ericsson. It didn't. And there was no message there on that site saying, hey, we put our weight behind Google now, and we're gonna, go to that site instead. Like, it was an interest. It would be like going to -if.org and not seeing anything updated. It would be like, oh, well, someone else took over this, and we're not doing it anymore. Of course, I've mentioned Wowza a lot. I do a lot of Wowza work. I also have friends at Red 5 and Red 5 Pro. And they're making some interesting headway too with WebRTC. And I think that, again, we're in this hybrid scenario where these real-time protocols that people are trying to work out are going to augment the existing things that we've been using tried and true for years. So, and how you're going to implement that, it's not going to be cheap. It's, I'm not going to make it sound like it's super expensive, but again, it's just going to be extra dollars. I mean, mobile totally fragmented most of the development dollars out there. I mean, before iPhone and completely disrupted where we put development money, it was really the iPhone that forced the native app push once they got rid of Flash. It's really not in Apple's or Google's interest, to be honest, to put investment into their browser tech. I mean, why would they do it? Why would I if I was at Apple, why would I make Safari iOS do all this stuff that would make it easier for people just to build websites and not build apps, right? They have an incentive to push apps because they can control that content. Now I'm sounding so American and not very Canadian at all, but I'm not Canadian. I'm just a wannabe Canadian. But and this, and I'll be honest too. Most of my clients are in this world where they don't want to feel like. I mean, I can't. I'm probably not alone in saying this, but most of my clients, whenever we talk about native apps, they are just complaining about Google and Apple the whole time. Half the phone call is them complaining about Apple and Google being gatekeepers and how we have to get this stuff approved by them first versus just that wasn't their mentality for all their life as in internet development. They could just push a website out as long as they did the marketing for a URL, people would use their stuff, right? Or go check it out if it was going to fit. But I don't know. Again, like you talk to enterprise people, native apps are a no-brainer because they've got dev teams that they're going to hire to build it. You talk to smaller anyone else that isn't in this luxury of having teams at their disposal. It's just like native app. Oh gosh, okay, and you just got to go. It's a whole nother pipeline, right? What else? Well, I'm at the end of my slide deck. I'm going to just open it to questions at this point. I've already got a good 20 minutes or so before we start the next session. So I'd be happy to talk about use cases. I don't have any, interesting graphs to show you in terms of just how prominent Flash still is in the utilization of live streaming playback. There's other SDKs that I didn't mention. If you're into native app development, I know NanoCosmos is here too. They do great work with their SDK on mobile. So if you're having to push live streams out, but again, that's an SDK game that you're playing with app development. And I'm not saying again that you're not in that world, but it's an interesting time to see where money's being spent. I wish I was happier about this session. I don't have an uplifting message, and that's what I was saying to everyone before I came in here. I wish I had something better to say. I guess the good news is that as much as the browser vendors are doing to disable Flash, people are still able to use it as a stopgap. Still, those days are becoming harder and harder to appreciate as they do lock down on enabling. Any kind of, you look at OpenTalk, they require a plugin if you're on older browsers. There's still a lot of old tech. I don't have to tell you that when it comes to a lot of organizations, especially government, you're talking about, even those dealerships I was talking about before, they've got a lot of old tech in dealerships. Have you ever gone to a dealership? They don't have like fancy MacBook Pros, you're lucky if their sales system has something other than terminal prompts on it. But, when they're watching a live broadcast, it's something that we have to keep in mind is just what is available at these dealership locations. And it can be old tech. They might not have the latest and greatest browser to watch it. And again, you're talking about that kind of situation. They're usually, and government's much this way too, where you're not talking about people watching individually. You actually have in a lot of corporate and government, and I would probably say educational constructs, you have many people watching one screen. Like they're all gathered in someone's office, maybe their boss's office, watching who's ever got the biggest TV connected to a computer, and that's who's watching that broadcast. Again, that's very specific. That's not your average live stream statistic, but all those use factors play into that. Do we have any questions? Anyone care to comment? David?
I'll give you a use case, and it's interesting since you brought up WebRTC and all that.
And disclosure, you're in government, right?
Well, yeah, but it's more for news gathering. So,
Yeah.
So I'm looking at ways, say, you'd have a Facebook Live. So imagine two people, one person at least using, say, OBS or Wirecast. And they would take in, say, an RTMP stream from somebody in the field. And depending on how you do it, you can get the latency down pretty low. Sometimes, like within a couple frames, depending upon how risky you want to play it on the web. Now, what I'm trying to train people to do, and I don't think this is very effective in a real-world scenario with real people who aren't geeks, I'm trying to get them to use as sort of a cloud IFB, trying to get them to use Mumble. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't used it yet for an integration, but I've looked into it.
It's using Opus, so it's very low latency, so you can hear somebody talking. They won't be able to see they probably won't be able to see people both ways, but they'll be able to at least get the audio quicker and that kind of thing. So I don't know, I'd like to see something with WebRTC sort of tackle that sort of a use case. That would be really neat because being able to see somebody
Right.
You know, if you're in a place where your internet's pretty bad, roaming may still make more sense, but
Right.
it's sort of one of the things I'm thinking about. So I don't know if that's useful. But.
No, I appreciate that. As a comment that I. And it is interesting that, you know, Twilio just recently added video, right? Because they were known for audio only, and just how, I don't know, what I'm pulling out of that is, you know, the audio argument there too, right? I mean, just, but I don't know what more to say. I don't know. I don't have anything else to add to that. Any other questions? Yes.
Field question. Some, this scenario, you have an IP camera. You spoke about RTSP. You have an IP camera, and for some reason your encoder is sitting in. You have a big appliance. It's sitting in a data center or back in your office. Have you had any experience with latency or jitters using an RTSP feed from the IP camera to the encoder, like over like a cellular network like LTE or 4G? What's the performance going into the actual encoder from the camera?
Usually those are hardwired connections. I don't have to worry about mobile. I am starting to think, and I actually was the guy who hires me in British Columbia government. That's really been the hard push for having cell or bonded cell as a backup to any live broadcast that we're doing now. So that's been and again that's not so much a last mile kind of thing, but just having the ability to have a backup for a live stream has been, and it's happened. We used Teradek cubes, and at one event, someone unplugged the Teradek, and the person didn't even know it was running on battery, and it was the primary encoder. It failed, and it failed over to a second one that was running on a bonded solution, and I build Wowza modules, so I built a module for them that does an A/B automatic switchover on the live stream. So so no one noticed that there was even a switchover. Thankfully, there wasn't enough of a difference between the two transmissions that anyone really noticed it. I think maybe there was a couple frame overlap where, you know, the one encoder wasn't exactly, you know, because it was over a bonded cell.
In your
But
scenario, the encoders are normally at on site.
that's right.
Hardwired.
Yeah.
To the camera.
Yeah.
Okay, that's your
So.
recommendation.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously if you can do it, but there's lots of situations I can imagine where you don't have that. I mean, as I'm getting more involved with municipal government, hardwired connections may not be an option to some remote IP cam, especially in like areas of BC where, you know, there's a lot of wilderness. Even in the town, it's very wilderness-like. And we're starting to explore that. It was funny, I was just talking with the publisher of of Stream Media, and even at his home, he's using microwave to transmit. I mean, you can get these cheap microwave, you know, receivers and senders. And he's using that just for a security camera, and you know, using PoE to power the camera from it. So it's some interesting stuff that I think we're starting to see on the low tech end, or I should say, cost-effective tech that maybe, you know, wasn't available.
But I was thinking about more of like a big, like a wide encoder that you actually put in a rack.
Right.
How do you walk with that?
Right.
In the back of a truck, you know, to wire.
Like a V-brick style encoder, kind of?
Yeah, so like, it would more suit like one of the smaller boxes.
Right.
Portable boxes.
Right.
Well, my concern was like performance of those smaller boxes versus
Right.
big elemental.
Right. I mean, performance in terms of just being able to work over a compromised network connection and just how well they're actually compressing.
How well they're actually compressing.
Right.
What is the stream, the quality of the stream? Do you give up quality for portability?
Well, I would say for sustained throughput. I keep hitting that mic even though it's not active. I should just disconnect it. Yeah, I'm trying. I want to make sure I'm understanding your viewpoint correctly, but yeah, I would definitely go for a lower quality that's sustained than dropping frames in it. I mean, obviously, I would. That's where codec. I mean, I think the Cube is one of the Teradek just announced at NAB that they're adding H.265 as a codec to their encoders, and that's, I think, is going to help in those kind of situations too, because you don't need H.265 as a decoder on a player, but if you're at least using that to push out of a compromised location in terms of bandwidth, you're gonna get more quality for that same bit than you would over H.264, and then transcode it to H.264 once you've got it where you need it. Yeah. So I don't know if that was helpful. We can talk more afterwards too. I'm also in that time zone, like just like the Hulu CTO was talking. I mean, I'm a little on that Pacific Coast time zone too at the moment, but I'm doing my best. Coffee helps. Coffee helps. Yes, in the back.
Have you seen any innovation in low latency for HTTP delivery, like HLS, kind of shred that latency?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I didn't really focus on that in this presentation, but I mean, and I think there's more than a few vendors here that are advertising how much they've reduced latency over HLS. And those are certainly, I mean, you're not going to get around the structure, though, of HLS, which is, a text-based manifest that's referring to chunks. You can do your best to make those chunks as small as possible, have as few references to chunks, but you're still reloading a manifest, over and over again and having to get those chunks from it. Unless you build your own sort of, I think a lot of, like just when we were in that Hulu session, just how, everyone's using HLS a little differently, and they're using it on ingest, on content, and they're having to wrap it, and I'm just like, it sounds pretty amazing. I'm sure they've come up with some pretty inventive solutions to deal with the problems that they've had to address. But anyway, going back to your question, certainly, I mean, one of the easiest optimizations I'll do for clients, especially if they're on Wowza, is to just, reduce their keyframe intervals on live encoders so that, they're using 1 second keyframe intervals, so that's going to line up with chunk sizes better. We can get, down to 1 second chunks. Typically, the smallest chunk I'll use comfortably is 2 seconds, and then a 3-second playlist, a 3-chunk playlist. So you got 6 seconds, potentially of latency. That's still not good enough for a cattle auction, right? I mean, anyone who's in a live purchase scenario, they're going to want an RT protocol behind it. And WebRTC could play into that. I mean, like, I might be able to push that guy into doing some, if I can make it cheap enough for him to demonstrate some WebRTC clients. He's already doing a move to Wowza from Adobe Media Server, because that's how old his solution is in terms of, like, it was all, like, literally, it was a big Flash app that had all these net connections open and doing all this crazy stuff with shared objects to synchronize data. So he's, and again, most of that tech is probably better off outside of Flash now. I shouldn't say probably. It is better to not be in Flash for that, but to have the video, the video component easily swapped out across, use the best tech that you've got available on that platform, and that's always been my mantra. It's just that it's still not an easy proposition, because it means, I'm not a WebRTC developer. I never have. I mean, I might become one, but that's not going to be my world most likely. I'm gonna have to find someone who's going to be well trained in WebRTC APIs and and work with them to do that. I'll probably be working more with the samples as Wowza converts it from a preview, because it's preview only now too in Wowza, so that just shows where it is, right? When you have a company like Wowza not offering support for a feature yet, because by their own admission, it's just like, this isn't a spec that's been finished yet, so what are we going to do? But I got sidetracked from your initial. I'm not talking about WebRTC, but even like with a tool like Wowza or anything that's chunking up your HLS, I mean, you can certainly, you can do a lot on your own to minimize latency. I mean, by default, most media servers are set up for 30 seconds worth of latency. That's by design. You have 10-second chunks and 3 chunks. So to do the math, some of them might even be set up for 6 chunks. So that's where you get your minute delay, right? But it doesn't take a lot of effort. I mean, you don't need big budgets to reduce HLS latency. And if you believe that, then just talk to me, and I might even give you the free help to do it. I mean, while you're here, this is the best place to get free help. You go, just come up and start talking to people. Any other questions? I think we still have time. No one? Well, enjoy the rest of your time at the conference. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you around at the networking reception tonight.